right, welcome everybody to another Cube Skills live show here. If you are just joining us in the chat, please let us know where you're tuning in from and say hello. We are coming at you live here on February 22nd in the Cube Skills community. Cube Skills is a community for everyone where we can join and collaborate with others to learn containers and Kubernetes. Today, we're joined by Michael Levan, the New Jersey DevOps guy. Definitely check out him on Twitter at a lot of places at the NJ DevOps guy. And so I will put up the link to his Gumroad. So if you go to the njdevopsguy.gumroad.com, you'll see he's got a lot of content up there, but just in general, he's been, coaching and teaching for a number of years. We've known each other for a while, and so he's puts out a lot of content. I'm actually amazed at how much content he puts out for DevOps, cloud, and Kubernetes and programming. So check out his content on Gumroad, where you can get, some of my favorites are the top 10 Kubernetes production best practices. Or you can attend a live classroom for passing the CKA. That's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And so, like I said, njdevopsguy.gumroad.com. And also check him out on Dev2. He's wearing the hat today, so he's representing. That's awesome.
It's my favorite hat.
And so he's posting regularly on there. Posts include the monitoring AWS EKS with Grafana and Prometheus, which I enjoyed reading, and then how to install a Kubernetes container storage interface driver. That was pretty cool too. Mm-hmm. So I like those ones. And he's got his own YouTube channel, folks. So check that out. I'm going to keep up with all the links here. So check that out, youtube.com/at Cloud Dev Engineering. So he has over 3.5 thousand subscribers. That's pretty cool.
Thanks, sir.
Talking about containers, Kubernetes containers, Go, Python, and more over there. And so we got a couple more because he's pushing out content like it's nobody's business. So check him out on GitHub, admin turn DevOps. Where he has the DevOps the hard way, setting up an environment in AWS. So that's pretty cool. I always get questions about that. So I really appreciate walking people through that. And then I wanted to plug your course, your Pearson course. So check out the GitOps for Kubernetes course, setting up a CI/CD pipeline with Kubernetes the GitOps way. So that's a really cool course. And you have a podcast too, right? Kubernetes Unpacked. Let's put that up there. And so Kubernetes Unpacked, a podcast where he's packing your ears. You like that? A little play on words. I'm a dad, so I have a lot of dad jokes. So be prepared for that. So he's pushing out a lot of good case concepts and knowledge for making you a better engineer. So check out that podcast. And then what we're all here to talk about, and we're also going to be doing a giveaway pretty soon here, which is that's a pretty long link. Sorry about that. But if you just Google 50 Kubernetes concepts every DevOps engineer should know. Yep, we both got the book here. I have the
there we go.
Here. Already made my my tabs and marked in it.
Awesome.
And full disclosure, I also have a little note about myself in here because I reviewed the book. So I have a little bit of bias there, I guess, but it was a good one. So this is a book for engineers who want to use Kubernetes in production and are looking for some guidance and examples on how it's used. It's packed full of goodies. So Michael Levan, welcome, and thanks for hanging in there for all the goodies that you're giving us today. And thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, no, totally. And thank you for having me. I appreciate it. And the one thing that I have to plug for you that I'm enjoying, that I will continue to enjoy, is your CKA book for Manning. That's an awesome one for sure. We got some labs coming out. Another shout out to Chad because he he carried a big weight for me in terms of the labs, and I did not know what I was taking on. He helped me tremendously. So thank you so much, man. Really do appreciate that. And yeah, thank you so much for reviewing the book and going through the chapters with me. Because when it comes to my work, I can, for better or for worse, be a little bit opinionated. So it's good. Like I like getting the opinions from you as well, because it helps me kind of level out a little bit, and it helps me also, pick and choose, my battles. Essentially. So,
Yeah, we were talking just before we came on about perfectionism, right? And I
yes.
think that was that was a big issue during writing this book, right? Was trying to write, there's a lot of content in here, but you even had more that you wanted to put in, and it was really hard trimming it down, right?
Oh, it was. So I got to tell you, when I first signed the publishing deal, the goal was, this, and this is what the book came out as. But the goal was, you got Nigel Polton's The Kubernetes book, phenomenal resource, always recommend it to everybody. And then you got Production Kubernetes by O'Reilly. I always forget the authors' names. I apologize, but I believe it was, at the time, at least, a bunch of folks from VMware. And the Production Kubernetes book, awesome. I've read it like 3 times. It's like my go-to source. Like if I ever need to refresh myself with something, I always have it up. I bought the hard copy. I have it on Kindle. It's my go-to. And then Nigel's book is awesome as well. So the thing is that you got the Production Kubernetes book, which is like way advanced, right? Like you probably don't even have to go that far in your day-to-day. Super good though. Highly recommended. Then you got the Kubernetes book, awesome for new people to Kubernetes. I wanted something in the middle, but I also wanted something that hit home to, you're going to use this book for your job, right? Because for me, like I've been in the Kubernetes space since 2016. I'm still consulting. So like I'm still hands-on. I'm still writing production level code. I'm still building Kubernetes environments on top of content. So what I wanted to do is I kind of wanted to take something and be like, okay, when I walk into a new project, or when I walk into, a new job with Kubernetes, or when I walk into like anything, right? What am I going to need? And that's difficult because originally the book was supposed to be 20 pages each. After the 3rd chapter, when it was 45 pages each, I was like, uh-oh, I gotta figure this out. Because it was way more difficult than I originally expected to fit everything that you need into 20 pages. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
Yeah, I think you did a good job in the end, and you did a good job of finding that happy medium of packing it full of content, but also I did notice that you had multiple sections where you reference other materials, and I think this is a good overall like reference manual, right? I would keep this by my desk, or keep this handy so that I can reference it and be able to, if I have a project at work that I'm using Service Mesh, for example, I would pop this open and be able to have a good starting guide.
Yep.
Um,
And that's the exact goal, honestly. Because, and I say it several times in the book as well. I say this section can be a book in itself. Because of that, I cannot go over everything, right? Like, for example, I have a section on Helm and I have a section on Customize. And those things can be books within themselves, very, very deep topics. So, exactly like you said, it was really supposed to be a production reference guide. I want somebody to be able to be like, okay, this is how I put Customize in Helm, okay, this is how I do GitOps really quick. So that was really the goal. The goal was like, yeah, you're going to need to always go deeper. One book is never going to solve everything for you, but it's a good starting point to take you and be like, okay, this is where I need to go now. These are the directions that I need to go in. So
yeah, I think it's a good guide map, a good place to start, and a good guide to where you could go. And that's with the complexities of Kubernetes, and all the places that you could go in terms of monitoring, and Helm charts, and Service Mesh, and all the add-ons, and all the initial complexities, and then all the add-ons and plugins. You could get lost pretty quickly. So I think it was a good reference. So what I like about the book is, and kind of, I'm trying to, the title of this book is 50 Kubernetes concepts every DevOps engineer should know. And I don't want to necessarily, list them one by one, but I do want to ask the question that people might have in the chat, which is,
Yeah.
or whoever's watching this later on, is, what are those 50? And so I kind of went through the book and I highlighted some, and like I said, I'm not going to go through all 50 of them because that would be pretty tedious.
A little bit.
But you go through. This is divided up into, let's see, looking at
3 points.
the
Yeah.
table of contents here.
Mhm.
There's 8 sections,
Mhm.
um, and then so the first section is managed Kubernetes. Second section is managed Kubernetes, but also including OpenShift and
Mhm.
Linode and DigitalOcean. Um, third section, actually, I'm starting at section 2. Sorry, because the first section is kind of an introductory,
Yeah.
what and why of
Yeah.
Kubernetes. And so the third section of the meat of the book is on-prem. I thought that was really interesting that you covered on-prem and went through bare metal and talked about Azure Stack, HCI, Google Anthos. So there's a lot of there's a lot of meat on the bone here, and then the next section is cloud native apps and actually running applications on Kubernetes, and then it's extending Kubernetes and maintaining complex apps. So using Helm, setting up CI/CD pipelines, using GitOps, talking about service meshes, and then we get into the monitoring. So we talk about um, how monitoring is different than observability. Thought that was important to cover there. And then logging, observing, metrics, traces,
Mhm.
and then you finish it up with security, which is cluster hardening and benchmarks. And
Mhm.
so that's an overview, and I'm sure you could get 50 out of out of those 8 sections. And so yeah, there's a lot in here. Do you have, I mean, I know the book just came out, but do you have a good way to boil it down
Mhm.
for folks besides just saying like this is, this has everything, and
Mhm.
it seems like it does, but do you have a good way to boil it down to like what are those 50 concepts that you need to know?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And this is something that I'm boiling down actually for everything at this point. For any of my live training, for my books, for my content, I put it into 3 different categories. And this is why I did it with the book. If you look at the book, I did part one, two, three. In the book, not different books. It's literally in the book. It says part one, and then you go part two, and then you go part three.
Hmm.
Day zero, day one, day two. Now, I don't want to sound too buzzwordy, but that's how I split it up. So you have your day zero stuff, which is your planning, your architecture guides, your understanding of, okay, how am I going to secure this? What tools am I going to use, etc. Your day one is implementation, right? Deploying the clusters, deploying the tools that you're going to use, et cetera, right? And then day three is your monitoring, your observability, your actual implementation of security. My dog just walked in, apologies. Um, so you got day zero, you got day one, you got day two. You got day zero planning, you got day one implementing the cluster implementations and the deployment stuff, and then day three is like, okay, now everything's up. Let me get a little GitOps in here. Let me get a little observability in here and monitoring, et cetera. Right, once everything's up, that's how the book is split up. So think part one, day zero. I'm gonna make everybody confused here. Part two, day one. Part three, day two. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to separate it, just because I think if you're looking at the book initially, it can seem overwhelming.
Yes.
Um, and so a lot of people, I imagine, have trouble finding out where to dive in. So I
Mhm.
think that's a good way to think about it. And also in the real world, that this is the order of operations, right? So
Right.
it
Yeah.
makes sense. And so so that's an easy way to go through the book. I'm wondering if there's a kind of for those, so a lot of people in the chat are either using Kubernetes at work, or maybe just getting started with Kubernetes, or making that transition from like going from admin to DevOps, like your your GitHub handle suggests, and all that. So, do you have any besides picking up the book and kind of dividing it into these days and order of operations, do you have any way for somebody to not get so overwhelmed, and to I guess utilize the book in the best way possible, so that they could be successful at their job? Like, I really want to kind of focus in on the like the real world, and the fact that this book is pointing out, like, these are things that you do in production in the real world. And so I want to differentiate it between those other books, like Kubernetes Up and Running, or Kubernetes in Action, or what have you, which kind of start at a fundamental level and then build upon those concepts as kind of in a research way, versus looking at it from like my boss is telling me I need to solve this, that, and the other thing, and as far as presenting problems to you in the field. What do you, I guess, what can you expand upon in terms of like the production aspects of your book?
Yep. Yeah. So good question. And I see some comments coming in as well. And I'm going to address your question while also addressing these comments. The idea of this book is not to read it from start to finish, like all the other ones, right? The idea of this book is, like you said, as a reference guide. So really, I mean, you could read it from start to finish. Like, it's not going to hurt you in any way, right? Because it all builds on top of each other. But the idea with the book is, and this is also just to not get overwhelmed, right? Is think about what you need to do for work, right? So I'm going to give you an example, right? Like, I'm going to open this up here, and I'm going to go to, if I can find it, right? I'm going to go to the table of contents here, right? And let's say I go to chapter 3. And no, actually, no, I'm gonna do another one here. Let's say I go to chapter 4, right? And let's say you're thinking to yourself, okay, my boss needs me to deploy bootstrap a cluster with kubeadm, right? I'm going to open the table of contents, and this is where you should always start. Start with the table of contents, and I'm looking down, because I'm looking at it as we speak, and I see, page 77, kubeadm deployment. Okay, let me go there, right? And then another one, for example, is, okay, my boss has just tasked me with understanding segregation, and namespaces overall, and how namespaces work with segregation, how they don't work, because it's not really the point of them from a security perspective. But then I go and I see, okay, there's a section here called exploring segregation and namespaces, and then here's what I need: the difference between single tenancy and multi-tenancy. So point being is, if you don't want to be confused by it, right, or you want to read the whole thing, please read the whole thing. I would obviously enjoy that. But if you want to just pick it up and be like, okay, my boss has tasked me with this, open it up, go to the table of contents, pick out, okay, I need to go here, I need to go there, and then just go to that section. Because the good thing about the book is it does build on top of each other, but you're able to get by reading the table of contents and going to the particular section. Like, you don't have to, it's not a book where it's like, hey, in 200 pages ago, we deployed this app. Do you still have that app deployed? Yes. Okay, cool. Let's start again with the app, right? It kind of all like starts fresh, so to speak.
Yeah. Good point. And I know from my experience in the field, this kind of way of reverse engineering things has become very useful. It's not always so in the field. You're not always going to be tasked with creating a new anything, really.
Right.
There's very few times where I've walked into a project and they've been like, okay, we're building this, that, and the other thing from scratch, and totally greenfield.
Yeah.
And so
Very
this is,
difficult to find. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I mean, yeah, it just doesn't happen. So I think this is a good book in terms of, like you just said, treating it as a reference manual. So, let's say you do get tasked with, okay, I now am tasked with managing 5 clusters. Let me go to, the um, logging and monitoring section, so I can figure out how to observe this cluster and figure out how to get proactive about what I need to do um, to not only monitor but take action on my clusters so that I can prevent certain outages and create that high availability and fault tolerance that Kubernetes is meant to solve. So
Mhm.
yeah, I just wanted to point that out because I think that's very important in terms of you know um, the real world and how things work in the real world is not always from a research perspective, like for one, you never have time to do the proper research, right?
Mhm.
And then also you're usually under the gun. You're having uh to fix something or to build upon something or to totally tear something down and replace it, migrate it. Those kind of things um that you get into in this book, which I think are super important just because it's it's most relatable to the real world.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the big differentiator as well. And just like, I want everybody to take this point away and take it home because I feel that it's incredibly important. Learning Kubernetes and implementing Kubernetes like at work are two very different things, right? And it's just like any technology, but I would say particularly with Kubernetes, because you can understand what deployments are, you can understand what pods are all day.
Mhm.
But the reality is, like you said, the things that you're going to be doing, you may not be going super in depth. Like Chad and I have gone incredibly in depth in Kubernetes because we've been working with it for so long, and uh, a lot of what we do is just based on Kubernetes, and that's it. But uh, in any other environments, right? Like if you're a DevOps engineer, you're going to have a lot of other stuff to deal with. Like you're going to have to deal with CI/CD, you're going to have to deal with infrastructure as code, you're going to have to deal with a bunch of different things, cloud, right, or on-prem or both. And because of that, I always recommend everybody to go as in depth as possible. But the reality is that you may not have the time to at work unless you do it on your own, right? And that's where you can pick up a book like this and have a good starting point.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to some questions in the chat
Sure.
here. I see a lot being asked, so I want to address for the people who are watching. And so let's see. Been following Michael for almost a year. He's brilliant. That's always a good one.
Thanks, sir.
Let's talk about eBPF real quick and what are some of the use cases in terms of Kubernetes. What are your thoughts on eBPF?
Yeah. So we'll take a step back for a second. We'll talk about Q proxy. Right. So Q proxy, you have your CNI, you have your container network interface, which does all of your local networking and your pod networking and stuff like that. And then you have your Q proxy. Your Q proxy on the back end, regardless of if you're using AKS, EKS, if you're using on-prem, whatever, doesn't matter. It's using IP tables. And if you don't know what IP tables are, they're not firewall rules, but I like to think about them like firewall rules because they're allowing inbound and outbound connectivity, right, inside of your cluster, right? So on your Linux boxes, if you're not using Kubernetes, you still have IP tables, right? It's a Linux concept or a Unix concept, whatever.
Yep.
The thing about IP tables is they don't particularly scale well and quickly inside of larger environments. Now, the other downside about IP tables is, let's say, some applications running, whatever the case may be, it has to go and it has to look at an IP table, or it has to go and has to create a new rule or whatever. As it's going through and looking, or as it's being created, it has to go through all of them over and over and over. It can't just go to just one. It always has to like consistently go through all of them to find the right one.
Mhm.
That's why it doesn't scale very well. It's it's a little bit slower in larger environments and just in general. Because of that, What eBPF allows you to do is it allows you to completely remove the need for IP tables. It's really what it does. So it's kind of taking it more at the kernel level versus, a particular, I'm not going to call it a third party. IP tables isn't a third party, but you're using like a program, right, on the kernel versus, just going to the kernel straight away. And that's what eBPF is doing. It's kind of bypassing that need, so to speak. And there are other features of it as well. You have some security in there, right? So for example, if you're doing something like Cilium or Calico with WireGuard and you're implementing eBPF with that as well, you have certain encryption capabilities for east-west traffic for your pods and stuff like that, where it may save you the need to jump right away to a service mesh, right? Because a lot of the times you'll have a service mesh, and one of the primary reasons that engineers want to pick up on it is because they want that east-west encryption for their pods and for their services and stuff. So there are a lot of other capabilities with eBPF, but I would say the biggest thing to remember is that removal of the no longer the need of QProxy and going straight to the kernel versus utilizing a program, if you want to call it a program, like IP tables.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself. So for Kedanarth, who asked that question, I put a link in the chat, but take a look at Cilium, which Michael just referenced in terms of being a CNI, but also a CNI that takes advantage of eBPF for that kernel optimization. And also check out the link that I posted, which is eBPF for beginners. Liz Rice is a good person to follow for that, and she's always providing the goodness on eBPF and Cilium, and she works for Isovalent and all that. So next question is, this is a good one. So let's pull it up here. I'm a beginner in the container world. Would this book be a good starting point for new engineers like me? What would you say, Michael?
No, I would not recommend it. If you're super new to Kubernetes, listen, I'd love for you to buy it, of course, but I would not recommend it for anybody super new. I would recommend the Kubernetes book by Nigel Poulton, something like that, but I would not recommend my book simply because my book is, the next step, right? So like you essentially what would happen is, you would read Nigel's book and then you would go a step ahead and you would say, okay, now I'm going to read Mike's book, right? And then you would go a step ahead again and then you would read, the production Kubernetes book. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Next question is, what is the essential tech tools you should learn first to master Kubernetes?
Yeah, so good question. And I always find the answer ironic because a lot of people, when they're coming to Kubernetes for the first time, they think that it's very dev focused, which it is. However, I would argue that 70 to 80% of Kubernetes is more sysadmin infrastructure engineer focused. And the reason why I say that is because to even get Kubernetes up and running properly in production, you need a lot of infrastructure experience. You need a lot of things like auto scaling. You need to understand operating systems. You need to understand how backup disaster recovery works, how high availability works, how scaling works, all of that. You also need to understand at an incredibly great level networking. So I'm not saying that you need to be a double CCIE here, but you should have a good understanding of network administration, of especially how routing works, how protocols work, how ports work, how traffic flows, right, from one place to another. Because you could write the best code in the world and you could package that thing up in a container image and pop it into a Kubernetes manifest, and it's phenomenal and following all the best practices, but it's not going to go anywhere if your networking is, not up to snuff. So yeah, I would say the best thing that you can do for yourself is understand infrastructure and understand networking. Now, how would you do that? Pick up a Linux Plus book. go and watch one of the gajillion free YouTube series on Linux for beginners. Um, gosh, somebody just put out a really good bash for beginners. Give me just 1 second. I'm gonna look for this here. Oh, okay, yes. Where is it? AKS bash for beginners. I'm gonna put this link here. Oh, can I put? Okay, wait. I'm putting it in private because I can't put it in the comments because I'm not logged in. So that's a really good new bash series, and it goes over Linux and stuff like that. I would definitely highly recommend that. And then in terms of like networking, pick up a Network Plus book, the CompTIA one. You don't have to get a cert or anything like that, but you can pick up that book. Or else, again, like I said, you can go to YouTube and find the gajillion free Network Plus resources.
Mhm.
Professor Mezer, I remember watching him a
Mhm.
decade ago. I don't know if he's still around or not. I'm pretty
He
sure
is.
he is. He is.
Yeah.
Yeah, Network Plus, great resource there. He's very good and puts out the A plus stuff and the Network Plus stuff and all that. So.
Yeah. Professor Messer helped me with my A plus back
Mm-hmm.
in 2008.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, he's still around, which
Mhm.
is awesome, and
That
it's
is
totally
cool.
free, which was nice.
Mhm,
But yeah, good point. Yeah, Linux and Linux networking and any resources that you have for containers in terms of I know Docker's still around, and
mhm,
but I guess a follow up question to that might be in terms of learning about Docker versus Containerd versus
mhm,
Cryo versus some of the other container engines. Um, Perhaps they could generalize their knowledge and learn about the um, container um, the container interface
mhm.
for I'm drawing a blank here, but how we got rid of the Docker shim
Oh, yeah.
and are now kind of standardizing on
Mhm.
open container initiative.
Yep,
So
yep.
yeah, so that's something to look up as well.
Yeah, so the biggest thing there to remember is like, yes, like containers are a prerequisite. If you don't know containers, like Kubernetes doesn't know how to do anything when it comes to containers. Kubernetes cannot start, stop, run containers. It's all
Mhm,
done based on the container runtime. However, Docker, it has the container runtime and it has the engine, right? The
mhm.
runtime, which used to use Docker shim, and it was like a middleman, so to speak, inside of Kubernetes. They got rid of that, and now you're going to see mostly CRIO essentially. Um, but at the engine itself, you could do things like create, your container images. You can do things like, I think Docker Compose. I think Docker Compose is based on the engine as well. And then you have Swarm, which is the orchestrator. But point being, you're going to see a lot of environments more or less using like Docker files to build their container images. You can use Scaffold, you can use cloud native build packs, a bunch of different ways. But point being, you're probably going to see a lot of Docker files building container images. Once you understand like the concept of Docker of like building container images and stuff like that, like cloud native build pack, Scaffold, it's all doing the same thing. Once you understand a container runtime, you can use Docker, for example, locally using Docker desktop, CRIO, Containerd, like they're all doing the same thing. They all have the same job. It's just different name, different command line, different way of doing it. Like if you're using CRIO, you got what is it, CRICTL, I think.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So it's like they're all doing the same stuff, just different commands, right? It's just, same thing as anything else in tech. It's all doing the same stuff. Once you got one concept down, you can figure them all out pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, here's a good question. When do you transition from learning Kubernetes to working with a cloud provider and a managed Kubernetes cluster like EKS or AKS?
Yeah, good question. And I'm not going to give the consulting answer of it depends, but what I am going to say is this. There's nothing stopping you from going as deep as you want into Kubernetes. I personally recommend it because I think it's fun and I think it's exciting, right? However, if you're thinking about Kubernetes, right, just for like your job, right, like you're thinking, I got to get this thing up and running, right, you're most likely never gonna, unless you have stuff on prem already, you're most likely not gonna have a lot of stuff on prem. So you're most likely not gonna need to really go in and like, okay, I have a big cluster. I need to separate I need to separate etcd into two different clusters outside of the control plane. You're most likely not going to see that unless you have like a big on-prem environment. However, what you should understand are the core concepts of Kubernetes, what's inside of the control plane, what etcd is, what the controllers are, what schedulers are, etc. Because what I see a lot is people will just be like, I don't need to know any of that stuff because the control plane is abstracted away from me in the cloud with AKS and EKS, etc. And then once something goes downhill, once you have to troubleshoot, you're not going to understand what's going on. So what I would recommend is, again, go through, Nigel's book goes over like the beginner level stuff of what the control plane is, etcd, etc. The pick up Chad's book, the CKA book, Acing the CKA, because that's going to go over at a good understanding level of what all of these components in the control plane and the worker node means. Once you have a good grasp of that, then you should be comfortable with spinning up AKS, EKS, etc. Can you do it? Can you spin up EKS, AKS before going through these resources? Absolutely. Will you be incredibly confused once the slightest thing goes wrong? Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, there's
Oh,
benefits
yeah,
and drawbacks to,
yeah.
having a control plane that you can't access and that, that you don't have control over, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
So I would just add to that it does depend on your role in terms of what you're going to be responsible for in your role, right? If you're going to be responsible for cluster maintenance and more of a administrator, I would suggest building a cluster from scratch, going through Kubernetes the hard way, or getting to know how to create a multiple control plane stack. But if you're more of a developer and using Kubernetes just as a platform and to deploy applications to, I would definitely eliminate that unnecessary barrier, right? And just go for the managed Kubernetes.
Yep.
So another question is, we'll do one more question and then we'll go to the winner of the books. We're giving away 3 books today, which is pretty cool. And so last question is, we'll come back to questions after, but what do you prefer for Kubernetes in production as managed Kubernetes? Okay, so kind of to piggyback off the last question, now that we've, let's say we've decided on managed Kubernetes, which one do you prefer? What are you most familiar with?
I think they're all doing the same thing, right? Like more or less, they're all doing the same stuff. You're gonna get to the end either way, right? With that being said, whatever cloud you're on, if you're on Azure, use AKS. If you're on AWS, use EKS. If you're on GCP, use GKE. Don't switch clouds. Don't up and shift your entire environment because you got to be on one of these, right? They're all doing the same stuff. Which one do I prefer? It's such a hard question. I don't really think I have a preference, honestly. I think AKS is the easiest. I think GKE has the most options because, like Google created Kubernetes, right? So like they have really cool stuff. Like they have, like, for example, they have Anthos, right? Which is really cool. In Anthos or GKE, they have options to migrate, like right from the portal. You like click a button, answer a couple questions. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
You can migrate from VMs to Kubernetes. Like it's just like a migration path, like super straightforward. So like that's cool, right? Like GKE, like GCP for Kubernetes, like it just has like really nifty features, right?
Yeah.
And then I think EKS is great in terms of customization. Like AKS, for example, it'll assume certain things, right? For example, AKS will assume you want the metric server deployed.
Yeah.
Whereas EKS, you have to deploy it manually, right? With EKS, for example, you'll also have a lot of options for like collecting API logs, collecting authorization, authentication logs, and stuff like that. So I think EKS is the one, like it's a little bit harder than the rest, but it has more customization options. However, with that being said, whatever cloud you're in, just pick whichever one is there. Honestly, they're at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, they're all doing the same stuff.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a couple things that I think are important. One is ease of use and the features, like you mentioned.
Mm.
So again, if you're a developer and you're just trying to deploy your app, maybe GKE might be your option, just because it's easier to get up and running and
Right.
to deploy to. And then also just looking at it from an engineer perspective, or a DevOps engineer in the real world, like billing is a huge thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
The customer always wants to know, what is this going to cost me, and what is it going to cost me to maintain? And
Mm-hmm.
EKS, AKS, and GKE are pretty competitively priced as of today. EKS might be a little cheaper just because they have been around for longer, and
Mm-hmm.
they're kind of they're still kind of the 8,000 pound gorilla,
Mm-hmm.
and so that might be a good option. But each for that matter, each cloud provider has its own pricing calculator, and you can work out the pricing and figure out if that makes sense for whoever's paying the bill, because no matter what you go to, it's going to be expensive. So
Totally. Yeah, and the difference is, like you said, I mean, the differences are pennies. Honestly, it's not it's nothing to write home about.
yeah. So let's go to the winner. I think people are chomping at the bit trying to figure out who's going to win these 3 books.
Hmm.
So let's get a drum roll, please, as I announce the winner. I still need to I did this last time too with my last live stream, a few live streams ago, and still haven't gotten that drum roll, but I'm working on it.
That's
Anyways,
funny.
the winners of the 50 Kubernetes concepts every DevOps engineer should know book are, and it's not giving me the name. I'm just not gonna put your email on blast, but I'm just gonna put the first part of your email. So, and I'll paste this in the chat. So the first winner is Starzine 2003. If you're watching, go ahead and give a shout out, and we'll be contacting you to send you that book. The second winner is did have a name. So second winner is, I'm sorry, I'm not putting these up. So the first winner was Starzine 2003. Second winner is Neela Ba. Congratulations. And then the third winner is Hugh Taylor. All right, Hugh
Congrats,
Taylor.
everybody.
Yeah, so congrats, Starzine 2003, Neela Ba, and Hugh Taylor. You have won a free copy of Michael's book. So very exciting.
Awesome.
I will send you an email and get your address so we can ship those out to you as soon as possible. Very exciting. All right, so let's get back to a couple more questions.
Sure.
And then we'll maybe chat a little bit about what you got going on, Michael, and learn how to tune into all the cool stuff that you got for us. So next question. Why are there so many different ways to deploy Kubernetes? KubeADM, K8s, everything else. I think they mean K9s or K3s. How do you know what to use? So that's a very good question. It's kind of overwhelming, right? And you go through the 50 different ways and the all the Kubernetes distributions. How do you know what to use, Michael?
I think it goes back to the, what should you use, AKS, EKS, GKE. it's all doing the same thing, right? Like at the end of the day, you're getting to a particular goal of I need to create a Kubernetes cluster, right? And I need to run something. Now, there are some specialized uh, there are specialized scenarios here, right? So like for example, micro K8s, great, in maybe a smaller environment, maybe like in an IoT style environment, something like that. KubeADM, great if you need to bootstrap clusters on-prem, a great automated way to do that. So it's a tough question. Like, how do you know what to use? Here's my answer, and I think it comes down to everything in tech in general, right? Like, how do you know what to use? Because there's a gajillion, billion, million tools for everything. There are different approaches to everything, different best practices. I mean, for everybody on the call, right? How many times have you walked into a new environment and they do it completely different than you did in your old environment? Same technology, same platforms, same everything. They just do it differently. And the reason why is because there's a million different ways to do one thing in the tech space. That's how it's been since the beginning. Um, the first thing that you should always do is get your business recommendations or get your business needs, right? So, for example, if your business comes back to you and says, hey, we need to deploy clusters on-prem, you're not going to say, okay, let's use AKS, right?
Right.
Like you get understanding your business needs and your business requirements is like always step zero to anything in technology, right? Like spoiler alert, anything. You should never just deploy stuff just to deploy it or because it's the latest and greatest. If you want to deploy stuff and you think it's cool because it's the latest and greatest, get yourself a home lab. But when it comes to business and when it comes to work, regardless of what your position is, regardless of what your job is, you always must first understand the business needs. Once you understand the business needs, it's going to become incredibly simple to know which direction to go in. Again, if you're new and if you're walking into an environment for the first time and they say, hey, we're using Azure and we need to deploy Kubernetes. You shouldn't be like, well, let's use AWS, right? It doesn't make any sense. Like you should use what's there and what's available again for your specific business needs. So, long-winded answer to the question is always first understand your business needs. Always understand the business requirements. Once you understand the business requirements, it's going to become incredibly straightforward to make a decision. And again, that's not Kubernetes. That's Kubernetes, but that's everything. Anything in the tech space, it should always be thought of the same way.
Yeah, I think you're right. A lot of it does depend on the requirements for the job. And like you said, if your boss is saying, or if your customer is saying, we need this deployed on-prem, you're not going to choose a cloud provider. So I think that weighs heavily on which one you choose.
Totally.
Only thing I would add to that is I think a couple things related to my other question about should I do on or should I do local clusters or managed Kubernetes? I think it to reduce the barrier of entry, especially early on, is very important. I think a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people get into trouble where they try to, set up a home lab, or they try to do Kubernetes the hard way, and it just kind of exhausts them
Mm-hmm.
and ruins it for, actually what they're trying to learn. And if you're sitting there all day trying to figure out why the CNI isn't working, or why you're having this, that, or the other problem, I would say scrap that and use something that's familiar. And by familiar, I mean, like, if you have Docker Desktop running, like use that Kubernetes cluster, because
Mm-hmm.
it's built into Docker Desktop and it's very easy to use. And so I would say, eliminate that barrier to entry. And then secondly, I think think about how you're think about whether you're using this cluster for development purposes, meaning if you're building apps on your local machine, and how that transitions to how you're building clusters in production. So I would actually advise you to go through the process of thinking about, how am I going to, run my clusters in development and do testing and make sure that I'm doing linting and security, vulnerability actions, and then how that transitions to my production cluster. And that's what we deal a lot with in the real world. We're all not the customers that I work with anyways are large customers. So they have many different environments and many different ways of deploying things. And so I think building out that good pipeline from dev to test to staging to prod is how kind of my mind operates. Is really important. And the easiest transition to do so, the easiest transition from those different environments, dev, test, staging, prod, I think is the way to think about it, in terms of not creating a lot of extra work for yourself, right?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And something that I just want to comment on, going back to what you said about, getting overwhelmed and stuff and thinking like, oh, how does a CNI work? All right, let me just go try to figure this part out. I know it's easier said than done. Trust me, I live it most of my days, right? But don't get discouraged, and don't throw in the towel because it's difficult. I'm gonna let everybody in on a little secret here, and there's a lot of people watching, and I think there's gonna be a recording of this, so it's gonna last forever, and I have to live to my words here. I write Kubernetes books. I write Kubernetes blogs. I create Kubernetes courses. I do Kubernetes live training. I consult for a lot of people, a lot of big companies that everybody knows their name, for Kubernetes, right? For both content and general consulting, like actual hands-on work. I still Google every day. There are still a million things I don't know. There are still a million things I forget. There are still a million things that I have to figure out. I don't have all the answers. With that being said, when you're thinking of getting discouraged and thinking, I don't know this, just think the guy that you were just listening to on the live stream that wrote a book and did this and did that is still learning, is still figuring things out. This is a marathon. This is not a sprint. Learning Kubernetes and understanding containerization changes literally almost all of the time. Go look at the CNCF landscape. There are over 1,300 tools and platforms. There is absolutely zero way and zero chance that you will know everything, right? And with that being said, let me also say something. I'm wrong, right? There are times that I'm wrong. There are times that I publish things and I push things out and I'm wrong, right? Whether it's on a video or maybe I made an oopsies on a blog post or whatever the case may be, right? And there are people that come at me and they're like, you're wrong. You shouldn't be creating content and teaching people because you're wrong about things. Spoiler alert, we're all wrong, whether it's in content or whether it's in production. There is never going to be a time in your entire career, I can promise you, that you will be right every single time. If there is something wrong. There will be plenty of times that you are wrong with something that you try to implement or something that you say. Don't get discouraged. Keep going. It will work out. I promise you that. If you keep to your studies and if you keep being really interested in this stuff, right? Like, it doesn't. I'm not saying be passionate about it and do it 20 million times, 20 million hours a day, right? But if you're interested in what you're doing and if you're pushing forward, you will be fine. I promise you. Promise you.
Yeah, that's a good, wow. Michael Levan dropping some humility and honesty here in the live stream. I appreciate that. We'll hold you to your word on that. And you heard it here, folks. Like, he's not perfect. Nobody's perfect. So that's a good lesson good takeaway from this is, I think, in a lot of ways you have to be comfortable with being wrong and comfortable with being uncomfortable, right?
That's a good life lesson, by the way. Be comfortable with being wrong and be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That's just not tech. That's life as a whole. So,
Yeah, most definitely. I think that's a really good place to close things out,
sure.
and a good takeaway. I'm definitely going to use that as a guide as we continue throughout this the rest of the week, and I encourage everyone else to do so as well. Michael, where can we follow you and see what other new products and
Sure.
content you're pumping out these days?
Absolutely. Yeah. So honestly, the best place at this point is LinkedIn. I'm doing way more on LinkedIn nowadays than I am on Twitter. LinkedIn, I'm posting 2 to 3 times a day. Each of my posts either contain a big piece of content in itself, just as a post that you can learn from, or some type of blog, video, course, etc. On Twitter, you can also follow me at the NJ DevOps guy. Again, I'm not as much on Twitter as I was, but I still do post daily or every other day or something like that. A lot of my posts are like code snippets saying here's how you can do this and that and stuff, or some threads. But yeah, I would say the best place you can find me right now is LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is like my resume. It has everything, all my content, my videos, my courses, my books, everything. Anything and anything that you need to find about me, you could find it on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time today, Michael. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you making this book and providing so much good content for folks to use, and a lot of real world stuff that I think people will get a lot of good use out of. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And thank you, everybody who has gotten the book. Thank you for everybody who's reading the book. Thank you for everybody who decided to spend 57 minutes of their day listening to me babble. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of good learning there.
Yeah.
And yeah, so to just close out, check out Cube Skills. It's a community where we are learning the stuff that we were talking about today. So cubeskills.com to check out how you can join that community for free and to get connected with other people who are in a lot of ways in that same boat. So yeah, thanks again, Michael, for jumping on, and everyone have a good rest of your day. See you guys.